Hi, I am Jason and I'm from Henderson, Nevada. I grew up there with a family of 5, which included my parents as well as my 2 siblings, but through the years I moved to California in search of my passion and living. I'm 44 and previously some incidents happened in my life that completely shattered my notion of a perfectly happy family and made me realize that the people whom you consider your own can betray you in the cruelest way possible. Nonetheless, I took my revenge, and even though it was a bit hard, everything was bound to happen and it taught me a lesson. So for almost the entirety of my life, I used to be all about my work. After graduating and working a bit here and there, I decided to open my own app development company. I came from a pretty wealthy family, and so I did not struggle much with gathering funds for the establishment. Everything went smoothly, and now I had this thriving app development company that I had built from the ground up, and it was my baby. At that time, every waking hour, I used to be thinking about new features, user experience, and the next big update. I loved it, and to put it plain, I was damn good at it, because if there was one thing people knew about me, it was that I was driven towards coding and all. My team and I were a tight-knit group, always pushing the envelope and trying to stay ahead in the fast-paced tech world. Work was my life, and I did not mind one bit. That was until I met Laura. My company was just a startup at that time, and I attended a lot of business networking events, the kind where you wear a name tag and shake a lot of hands. Honestly, I usually found those things pretty tedious. But this one turned out to be different because I met Laura at one of those events. Laura had come with a friend of hers and was there just for fun. A mutual friend introduced us, and from the moment we started talking, there was this spark. Laura was something else. She had this incredible energy, a vivaciousness that was contagious. She was charming and had this knack for making everyone around her feel like they were the only person in the room. Not kidding. I remember the first time we really talked. She was not just nodding along or waiting for her turn to speak, she was genuinely interested in everything. She asked about my company, my ambitions, and what drove me. And she got it. She understood the late nights, the obsessive focus, the thrill of launching a new product. But more than that, she seemed supportive, like she was genuinely rooting for me to succeed. We hit it off right away, and became inseparable after a few meets. We used to go out for dinner and end up talking for hours about everything under the sun. Movies, books, dreams, and you name it. There was this effortless connection between us, something I had not felt in a long time, if ever. And as much as I loved my work, being with Laura started to change things for me. I found myself wanting to make time for her, to be there, and not just physically present, but really there. I don't really know if it was my first whirlwind kind of romance or what, but it had driven me completely mad. For the first time, I had started to see a future that was not just about the next app or the next big client. Laura made me realize that having someone to share those successes with made them even sweeter. She supported my ambitions, but also showed me the value of balance, of taking a step back to enjoy the ride. But Laura took me just as a friend, while I was completely head over heels for her. It was not always easy. I was after her for a long time, and one day she finally agreed to go out with me, along with multiple demands of her, like going out on a week-long trip and pampering her with gifts was a must. Which, now that I think, were major red flags, but my love-stricken self saw everything pure as white. After Laura had agreed to go out with me, our relationship was just like a fast-paced romance that caught both of us off guard. A month in, Laura and I were still in that phase where everything felt new and exciting. Then, out of nowhere, Laura found out she was pregnant. I remember the moment vividly. We were sitting in our favorite little coffee shop when she told me. My mind went blank for a second, and then this overwhelming sense of joy and excitement took over. But I was confused as well. Don't get me wrong, I was going to be a dad. So I was excited, but it was unexpected too, and felt like a lot of pressure at once. Plus, I was still not sure of Laura as a person, and I was afraid to run into a wedding when I had not known her long enough to know everything about her. Truth be told, I was becoming a bit unsure of Laura the past few days. But alas, we decided to get married. It was not a hard decision, it was the right one. Now that Laura was pregnant, I could not even think of abandoning her and was hopeful that our love would only grow stronger over time. Our wedding was not some grand spectacle, just a small, intimate affair with close friends and family, and everything was perfect. But even on that happy day, I could not shake this nagging feeling that something was off. Laura seemed a bit different from the person I had first fallen for. It was subtle, nothing I could put my finger on at first. I told myself that maybe it was just the stress of everything happening so fast. After all, we had gone from dating to expecting a child and getting married in what felt like the blink of an eye. Laura's charm and everything were still there, but sometimes I noticed that she acted a bit weird. She had always been supportive of my work, but lately her enthusiasm seemed a bit forced. We still had our deep conversations, but there were times when I felt like she was not fully present, like her mind was somewhere else. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was just overanalyzing things. After all, I had my own anxieties about becoming a father and balancing my demanding career with my new responsibilities. Maybe it was just the stress of it all getting to both of us. Yet, as we settled into married life, those little moments of doubt lingered. Laura would occasionally make comments that seemed out of character, or she would have these sudden mood swings that left me puzzled. I wanted to chalk it up to pregnancy hormones or the adjustments of married life, but the feeling persisted. Despite these concerns, I was determined to make things work. I loved Laura and I wanted to be there for her and our unborn child, so I threw myself into preparing for fatherhood, hoping that once our baby arrived, everything would fall into place and those nagging doubts would disappear. But I was wrong. After the birth of Jessica, my daughter, the situation only worsened. And as she grew up, I started noticing more and more of Laura's peculiar behavior. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the stress of parenting a young child, but it became harder to ignore. Laura was often nagging about things that seemed trivial to me, and I could not help but feel she was more concerned with appearances and material wealth than our family's well-being. Don't get me wrong, I understood that maintaining a certain lifestyle was important to her, but it felt like she was missing the bigger picture. She used to spend hours shopping online, planning lavish parties, or obsessing over how our house looked, forgetting even about Jessica in the process. There were times when I used to come home and find her crying alone or in a diaper mess while Laura scrolled her phone. And I would have easily let it go if that had happened once. Because of course people make mistakes, but this had become repetitive in our house and pissed me off to a whole other extent. I just wanted us to be happy and healthy and to enjoy our time together as a family, but Laura was in her own world and had stopped caring about everything. When we were getting married, Laura had asked me if I was okay with her being an at-home wife, and I was completely okay with it. I had no problem providing for my wife, but what she was doing was unacceptable. She did things that made it seem like Jessica was not her own daughter from the start because she rarely looked out for her as a parent, but then she used to pretend in full swing in front of others. We used to have constant fights, and there were times when Laura threatened me that she would run away, which was my biggest soft spot because she knew I was big on the sweet, happy family image. Jessica, though, was the light of my life, and watching her grow and seeing her little personality develop was the best part of my day. Her laughter and her curiosity about everything made the tough times bearable. I wanted to give her the world, and I did my best to shield her from the tension between Laura and me. Work was also my escape and acted as my safe haven. And even though my life was in shambles, my company continued to thrive, and in many ways it was my saving grace. I poured myself into my projects and even worked from home because I used to come early from the office due to Jessica. The success of my company was a constant, something I could rely on when everything else felt so unstable. But even that came with its own set of challenges. Balancing the demands of a growing business with the responsibilities of being a father and a husband was exhausting. At home, Laura's nagging and materialistic focus continuously drove a wedge between us. We used to argue about the stupidest things, ranging from the amount of money she had spent, why I was not around more, the state of the house, etc., etc. It seemed like nothing I did was ever good enough for her. She used to complain that I was always working, even when I was at home, and yet when I was home and actually free, it felt like she would find any reason to pick a fight than talk. Despite the rocky relationship, I endured it for Jessica's sake. She deserved a stable home, a place where she felt loved and secure. I did not want her to grow up in a broken family, so I put up with the arguments and tried to keep the peace as best I could. I focused on the moments that mattered and ignored the rest. But I could not ignore the growing sense of instability in my personal life. It was like I was living in two different worlds. At work, I was a successful entrepreneur, confident and in control, and at home, I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the shifting sands of our marriage. I kept hoping things would get better, that Laura would see what really mattered, that we could find a way to reconnect. But now that I look back, that was the most foolish thing I had done. Whenever things got worse than before, I used to hope it would get better eventually, but that never happened. And just like that, years flew by, and before I knew it, Jessica had grown up into a bright and independent young woman. It felt like just yesterday she was this little girl running around the house, full of energy and curiosity. Now, she was packing up to head off to the University of California, LA. She had worked hard, and getting accepted at UCLA was a huge deal, and I was incredibly proud of her. The day she moved out was quite emotional. I helped her haul boxes up to her dorm room and tried to keep things light and cheerful. But when it was time to say goodbye, I was bawling my eyes out with zero shame, because I was going to miss my girl dearly. And after she was gone, the house felt eerily quiet without her laughter and presence. I tried to engage myself by diving even deeper into my work, as my company had grown substantially over the past few years, and we were still going strong. There was always a new project or challenge to tackle, but no matter how busy I kept myself, the absence of Jessica hit hard, and home felt like just a place to sleep rather than a place to live. Meanwhile, Laura's selfish tendencies had become even more pronounced over the years. She was still a bit sane in front of Jessica and used to play the victim, but now that Jessica was gone, there was no buffer between us. Her nagging turned into full-blown arguments. It was like she used to get happy with all this fighting, and she seemed even more obsessed with appearances and material things. Her behavior over the years was like a slow burn of toxicity, leaving a trail of hurt and frustration behind it. It was not just one big event, but a series of smaller, insidious actions that added up to reveal her true nature. One of the earliest signs was her lies. Laura was a master manipulator and used to spin webs of deception without batting an eye. She used to lie about little things, like where she had been, who she had been with, and even big things like money or her intentions. I caught her in so many lies over the years that I lost count. It eroded the trust between us and left me constantly questioning her motives. Plus, her selfishness knew no bounds. It was not just about her desires, it was about getting what she wanted at any cost. She used to manipulate situations to her advantage, guilt-trip me or Jessica into doing things her way, and throw tantrums when she did not get her way. It was exhausting, trying to navigate her mood swings and selfish demands. There was this one particularly painful instance that happened right after our wedding that I will never forget. It was when I was new to all this business game and she had tried to sabotage my career. When I started my own business, it was a leap of faith. I poured my heart and soul into it and used to work long hours by sacrificing my time to make it successful. Instead of supporting me, Laura used to criticize every decision of mine, belittled my achievements, and spread doubt about my abilities to others. It was like she wanted me to fail. Financially, she was reckless too, and had a taste for luxury and status, always wanting the latest gadgets, designer clothes, and expensive vacations. She used to max out credit cards behind my back, take out loans without consulting me, and dip into our savings for her frivolous desires. It was not just irresponsible, it was disrespectful to our and Jessica's future. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Laura's behavior was her lack of empathy. She could turn on the charm when it suited her, but underneath it all was a cold indifference to anyone else's feelings. She used to manipulate situations to hurt others, whether it was spreading rumors about friends or gaslighting me into doubting myself. It was like living with a stranger who only cared about herself. After all these years, I had come to realize the truth that Laura's actions were calculated and were designed to serve her own interests at the expense of everyone else's happiness. It took me too long to see it, but once I did, I knew I had to protect myself and Jessica from her toxic influence. And so with Jessica gone, I tried to protect my peace and did not meddle in Laura's work. It was like we were living in two separate worlds under the same roof. And to my surprise, even Laura stopped bothering me, which was not at all like her usual self. She had always been somewhat high maintenance, but recently, her behavior had shifted from demanding to downright secretive. She started taking her phone calls in another room, lowering her voice whenever I was around. I would ask her who she was talking to, and she used to get defensive, claiming it was just a friend or work call. But it did not add up because she did not work. If I said something against it, she used to say that she had picked something up. But no jobs require those kinds of calls, especially late at night. Then there were the unexplained absences. Laura would say she was going out with friends or running errands, but she used to be gone for hours, sometimes the entire day. I would ask where she had been, and she used to give me vague answers or simply brushed off my concerns like I was being paranoid. Once, I called a mutual friend to ask if they had seen her, only to find out Laura had not been with them at all. That was a major red flag. And she no longer picked fights with me and just used to ignore my presence around the house, which was so unlike her because if one thing Laura knew was to make my life a living hell. Then, one evening, I was going through our financial records, trying to make sense of our expenses. With Jessica off at UCLA, I wanted to make sure everything was in order and that we were on track with our savings. As I sifted through the statements, something caught my eye, and it was several large, unexplained withdrawals from our family savings account. At first, I thought it might be some mistake or maybe some big expense Laura had not mentioned. But the amounts were too significant to ignore. My curiosity piqued, and I decided to dig a little deeper. I started cross-referencing dates and amounts, trying to piece together where this money was going. The more I looked, the more suspicious it all seemed. There were transactions linked to accounts I did not recognize, and some of the money had been transferred to various shady-sounding entities. I could not shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Late that night, I sat at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out in front of me. As I kept digging, I stumbled upon a few pieces of evidence that pointed to investments in some dubious ventures. My heart sank further when I found what seemed like payments to a man named Zach. The name Zach was not familiar to me, but there were too many transactions linked to him to be a coincidence. I did a bit of sleuthing over the next month, like checking Laura's phone when she was not around, and to my horror, I discovered that Zach was someone Laura had been seeing behind my back for quite a while now. I felt so angry and betrayed, like how could she do this to us? To our family? After the initial shock of discovering her betrayal and the financial mess she had gotten us into, I knew I needed more answers, like who was this Zach guy, and what exactly had he been up to? So I decided to hire a private investigator to dig deeper into Zach's background. If I was going to protect Jessica and salvage what was left of our family's future, I needed to know everything. A week later, the investigator came back with his findings, and they were nothing short of shocking. Zach was a notorious con artist, a real professional scammer who had defrauded countless victims out of millions of dollars through elaborate investment schemes. He had been on the run for 4 years, constantly changing identities to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. As I read through the report, I came to realize that Zach must have been scamming Laura and preying on her need for excitement and her obsession with money and status. He had probably fed her all sorts of lies, like promising a future based on these so-called investments, all while pocketing our hard-earned savings. It was clear that Laura had been a pawn in his game, blinded by her own greed and naivety. I realized I could not let this stand. Not only did I need to expose Zach for the fraud he was, but I also needed to take my revenge on Laura with the full extent of her foolishness and her cheating. I spent weeks meticulously gathering evidence against Laura and Zach. It was a painstaking process, but I knew it had to be done right. Every night, after finishing up at the office, I used to sit at the kitchen table with my laptop and piles of documents, cross-referencing transactions and piecing together the puzzle of their deceit. One of the first things I did was install hidden cameras around the house. It felt strange, almost like I was living in a spy movie, but I needed hard proof of Laura's interactions with Zach. I placed the cameras in strategic spots, like the living room, kitchen, and even the office. I also managed to tap into Laura's phone and set the recorder up, recording every conversation she had with Zach. It was invasive, and part of me felt guilty, but I had to protect Jessica and uncover the truth. Every day brought new discoveries. I found texts between Laura and Zach, filled with sweet nothings and discussions about their so-called investments. One conversation stood out. Laura was bragging about how Zach had promised that they would bundle up all the money and live a life offshore. She was so wrapped up in his lies that she could not see the scam right in front of her. Or even if she did, she would never speak against it because that was classic Laura. I documented every transaction, tracing the flow of money from our savings account to various shady entities linked to Zach. There were large withdrawals that Laura had tried to hide, scattering the funds across multiple accounts to cover her tracks. It was infuriating to see how deep she was in, but it only fueled my determination. One evening, I got a lucky break. Zach called Laura, and I was able to record their entire conversation. He was pressuring her to move more money into a new investment, promising her that this was the big one. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and I knew this was the leverage I needed. With all the evidence in hand, I prepared for the final step, catching them in the act. And so I set up a plan of going abroad. I informed Laura that I had some work in Texas, and so I needed to go there for a month to handle everything. Because I knew Laura too well, I knew she would invite Zach into our house as soon as I was out, and that would be the perfect moment to catch them in their act. Then the day had finally arrived. Even if we were not on good terms, I bid Laura goodbye with all my suitcase and everything, went to a hotel room. The next day I returned when I was sure Zach was in the house through CCTV cameras to catch them in the act. I parked my car around the corner and walked back to the house. As I approached, I could hear their voices inside, talking and laughing. I steadied myself and quietly opened the door. Inside, I found Laura and Zach huddled together at the kitchen table, discussing their next fraudulent scheme. Laura had her laptop open, spreadsheets and documents laid out, while Zach was pointing at something on the screen. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they did not even notice the slight opening of the door. Then the idea clicked to me. I wanted to show Jessica her mother's true face and did not want Laura to play the victim in front of her later. So with my phone in hand, I video called Jessica and made sure she could witness everything. It was a tough decision, but she deserved to see the truth with her own eyes. As soon as the call connected, I stepped fully into the room. "Hey, what's going on here?" I kept my voice as calm as I could. "Jason, what are you doing here?" "I thought you were on a trip." "Well, I never left. And I am glad I did not. Jessica is on the line, by the way." Laura's eyes widened, and she glanced at Zach, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Jason, I can explain. This is not what it looks like." "Oh, really? Because it looks like you are planning your next scam with this con artist?" I pulled out the stack of evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past few weeks. "I have bank statements, recorded conversations, and video footage. You have been funneling our money into Zach's schemes, and now it is over." "Jason, please, this is not what it seems. He told me we would be rich and that this was a sure thing." "Laura, you have been scammed. Zach is a con artist, and you have jeopardized our family's future because of your greed and cheating. He is not going to run away with you. He is a thug and would only run away with the money." Zach tried to make a run for it, but I was ready. "Don't even think about it, Zach. The cops are outside. Happy jail time now." Before calling Jessica, I had already called the cops. I knew Zach had his history of fraudulent schemes and outstanding warrants. It was so surreal, watching the events unfold around me in my own home. Officers arrived swiftly, as if they had been waiting just around the corner. And before he could try to run away, they escorted him out in handcuffs, and his cocky up front was replaced by a look of defeat and malice. On the phone, I could hear Jessica's sobs, and I knew it must have broken her heart, but she needed to see all this. I bid her goodbye, promising to call back later and explain everything. After everything that had happened, the truth finally laid bare in front of Laura. Zach was not just a smooth talker, he was a seasoned con artist who had duped countless people before her. The police confirmed it and said he had a history of fraudulent schemes and outstanding warrants. If I had not intervened when I did, he would have disappeared with the savings, leaving Laura to face the consequences alone. Laura was shocked when she learned the extent of Zach's deception and stood in the living room like a statue. "Jason, please, you have to believe me. I did not know Zach was a con artist. He promised me so much wealth and security and a nice future. I was blinded by his words." "Don't try to use this as an excuse, Laura. You funneled our money into his schemes, you lied to me, you betrayed our family's trust, you cheated on me, and now you want me to just forgive and forget?" I was stupid, I made a terrible mistake. But I swear I love you, Jason, not him, and I love Jessica. Can't we find a way to move past this? Please give me another chance. Don't speak nonsense now that you are in a tight situation, Laura. You did not just make a mistake, you destroyed my trust, and I can never believe anything you say after this. Jason, I'm begging you. For Jessica's sake, for our family, let's try to fix this. I will do anything, just don't leave me. No, Laura. This isn't something we can just fix. You chose Zach over us, over our family, you made your bed, now you have to lie in it. You think you are so righteous, don't you? Always the perfect husband, the perfect father. Well, guess what, Jason? You are not perfect. You've made mistakes too. Don't act like you're so much better than me. Well, I'm better than you. I know that, no matter what you try to prove. Fine. If you are going to leave me, just know that I won't go quietly. I will make sure everyone knows about your so-called perfect life. I will take you for everything you have got. Do you think you are the only one who can play hardball? Think again. Do whatever you need to, Laura. I'm done. I'm not going to be manipulated or threatened by you anymore. Our marriage is over, and nothing you say or do will change that. I stood firm on my decision. I could not just sweep this under the rug and pretend everything was okay. The foundation of our marriage had been shattered irreparably this time by her choices, and with that, I severed all ties with Laura. Later, I called Jessica and let her know all the details. I knew she was still young for all this drama, but I wanted everything to be clear and plain in front of her, and I did not want her to get swept up by her mother's manipulation again. And so after listening patiently to everything, Jessica stood by my side throughout it all. But I was not done yet. I had one final card to play, one last shot at revenge. With the evidence I had gathered, I filed a civil lawsuit against both Zach and Laura. It was a way to hold them accountable for their actions to ensure they faced the financial consequences of their deceit. Though Laura suffered less because she was partially a victim of Zach's tactics, in the eyes of the law, still she had helped him out in the wrong, and that was a punishable offense. The legal battle was grueling and emotionally draining, but I knew it was necessary. It was about more than just money, it was about justice, about reclaiming some sense of dignity and closure for myself and Jessica. In the end, the lawsuit was settled in our favor. Zach was ordered to repay the whole amount of money they both had stolen, and Laura, some part of it, though it would never fully compensate for what we had truly lost. It gave us a sense of justice and closure. Then, as time passed, Laura tried her best to contact Jessica, but Jessica refused to meet her, blessing her with yet another fruit of her actions. After the whole ordeal, we came to know about Laura's miserable situation from time to time through mutual friends, but it was her own doing and she was paying for it. Looking back, I realized I had emerged from things stronger than I ever thought possible. I had faced betrayal head-on, stood up for what was right, and found a way to rebuild despite the pain. And even though I had my revenge back on Laura for all the years she had tormented me and how she had cheated on me, I had learned that sometimes the greatest revenge was simply to move on and find happiness again.